Dr. Russell James, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Great to be here. Appreciate the invitation.
We're going to talk about how we can help donors advance their hero story. And we'll get into what that means and what it doesn't mean in a second. But before we do that, you're the guy who puts people in an MRI machine and then asks them questions about dying and about charity and generosity and leaving a gift in their will so they could be remembered. And then you watch their brain light up as you're asking them different questions, and you see what messages resonate. How did you start doing that?
So that's a great question. It really, Mike, it comes from an idea of just trying to answer a question. The question started with we have this massive behavioral differences where if we look at older adults, let's say, who are making substantial charitable gifts, national data shows like less than 10% of them include any gift at all in their will or estate plan. And so clearly there was something different about that type of decision making. And so it's really just a process of trying to understand what
Right.
is that difference? How can we understand that difference? And how can we use that understanding to help encourage generosity in that way? So, yes, you are correct. That did lead to a series of experiments where we put people in the brain scanner and we have them do their estate planning while they're in the brain scanner. We have them make charitable decisions and volunteering decisions and decisions about charitable bequests. Although the brain does not light up, actually it turns red. It's actually an oxygenation process that we are tracking with the fMRI process. But absolutely, so we do find out some interesting things from that process.
Okay, well, that's a whole podcast to itself. But what I appreciate about that is that we always say that fundraising isn't easy, but it should be simple. And
Mm.
you're one of the guides who is doing these kinds of experiments, which to a lay person like myself, humble copywriters and marketers, we sort of understand some of this intuitively because we've tried stuff and it works.
Mhm.
But you're taking the science behind it and making it super super accessible. So that's one of the things that I appreciate about you, and why I'm so excited to have you on the show. So I want to start here. Most people don't wake up in the morning thinking, man, I should make a charitable donation today.
Mm.
But they might wake up thinking, yeah, I'm going to go to the mall today. I'm going to get some new shoes or Amazon or whatever. And a lot of charitable giving, often, not always, and we'll get into that. A lot of charitable giving comes from expandable income. At least for many donors, the first gift comes out of expandable income. So we are competing, so to speak, with goods and services that
Mhm.
offer a tangible benefit for people, makes them feel good about themselves, shoes, food, jewelry. What value can a charity offer?
So, Mike, what I'm going to suggest is that fundamentally, if we look at the value that fundraising can bring. Now look, a charity can bring value to lots of different people in lots of different ways. But the value that fundraising brings to the donor,
Right.
it's actually what I would call an enhanced identity. It's this idea of being able to help the donor make a gift that is personally meaningful for them. So we might think of that as an internal enhanced identity. Or we can even have some who are interested in a public reputation. That's an external enhanced identity. But those are both things that powerful and effective fundraising can bring to a donor. And so a lot of what we're looking at is what are the steps to actually deliver that kind of experience to the donor. Mike, I guess it comes back to this fundamental idea. There's a lot of interesting tricks and traps we can use to try to get a single response on a single message. But over the long term, the real question is, was this gift did it deliver a donor experience that was worth the gift. Because fundamentally, if we're not delivering a donor experience that's worth the gift, we're going to be unlikely to get that donor to engage in that experience again. And so, what I would suggest is the fundamental value that can make that donation experience worth the gift is delivering that enhanced identity to the donor. There are a lot of small nonprofits that like to engage in fantasy thinking of someday we're going to get that X million-dollar gift.
Right.
And that's fun and that's easy. But I'll tell you what's not as fun and easy is to start thinking about someday we're going to deliver a donor experience that's worth X million dollars.
Wow.
Whoa, now that's actually hard work.
Right.
And so when we start thinking about fundraising in terms of delivering value, through the donor experience, that can really change things in terms of doing things that are not only attractive and valuable, but are actually sustainable, where donors are going to want to engage in that experience again.
Right. Yeah. Seth Godin calls that the marketing flip, where you go from look at this thing I've made, support it or buy it, to I've been paying attention to you and I made this thing for you. Um, so that's the kind of mindset shift, right? From here we are doing great work, awesome, support us, to we've been paying attention to what you value, to the enhanced identity that you are trying to get to, you as the donor. Here's one way where I think we can help you get there. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you mentioned early on the donor hero story. And
Mhm.
we can think of this in terms of the idea of what role do different characters play in that story. Now, when I reference the hero story, I'm meaning something very specific there. We're talking about the universal hero story that way back in the 1940s, Professor Joseph Campbell
Yeah.
published his now famous book about the idea that across many cultures, whether this be Eastern cultures or Western cultures or island cultures or indigenous cultures or even modern versus ancient cultures, that we might have 1,000 different stories, but they're actually just different expressions of the core elements of that universal hero story, which he termed the monomyth. And so it turns out that those same monomyth elements, they can actually play into the messages that we communicate with donors.
Right. So you mentioned you got into enhanced identity a little bit, and I think
Sure.
we should clarify that a little bit. You talked about Joseph Campbell. I think maybe a lot of our audience might be familiar with Hero's Journey, but if they're not, that's something very easy to look up. Um, I've read your book, The Socratic Fundraiser, which is fantastic. I recently reread Aristotle's Poetics. And it's been a long while, but in college, I did read Plato and what he had to say about storytelling. And of course, like any parent, I'm just immersed in Pixar and Disney. So when you say enhanced identity, you're talking about the end or close to the end of the story, right? The hero went on a journey, and at the end, he has a new enhanced identity. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, so Mike, all you've got to remember to keep it simple is just 3 words, because this is actually a circular process that involves just 3 words, and those 3 words are: it begins with identity.
Mhm.
The identity then connects to a challenge. The challenge promises and then leads to a victory, and the victory then connects back to that original identity.
Right.
So, as we go through that process with those 3 steps, we begin with original identity. Now, in generic storytelling, this is the backstory. This is the setting for the story that we're going to tell.
Right.
We then progress to the challenge. Now, in story, that is often called the inciting incident, where the hero must make a choice or a decision. Now, in fundraising, we call that the ask. However, that inciting incident ultimately leads to a victory, or what we would say in generic storytelling is the climax of the story. But then after the climax, we have the final part where I see that the hero or the main character actually has gone through a transformation.
Right.
That is where that victory leads to an enhanced identity. So, in general storytelling, this is where we have the confirmation of the victory that happens at the end of the story. Now, those are all basic storytelling principles. Let's talk fundraising.
Yeah.
So, what that means in terms of fundraising is we actually begin with the donor's original identity. Now, when I say that, I mean specifically that comes from three things. It comes from the donor's people, their values, and
Mhm.
their life story. And the key is to be able to connect those original identity elements with the challenge. So the challenge is, of course, the fundraising ask. That is the request to go on this journey with us where you're
Right.
going to leave behind your ordinary, small, self focused world of personal consumption. And
Mhm.
you're going to go on this journey to make an impact in the larger world, which is what philanthropy allows donors to do. And so we can get some of that information by asking questions about donors' connections, their life story connections, their values connections, their people connections with the cause or the organization or maybe even the specific project. When we do that ask, we actually want to make sure that we're providing a challenge that promises a victory. So it's not enough just to make some open ended challenge for
Right.
no particular reason. We need to promise a victory in the story. And more importantly, we need to not only promise a victory, we need to promise a victory that is personally meaningful to the donor. In other words, it is a victory that connects back to their original identity. So it can be something that delivers personal meaning for them, something that delivers public reputation for them, but in some way it will connect back to the donor's people, values, or life story. And ultimately, the donor ends up with an enhanced identity, even if it's completely private, even if there's no public or reputation impact, but it is still an internal enhanced identity for the donor that results from that story. Now, that is the donor hero's journey that delivers this enhanced identity. Now, the nonprofit or the charity is very important in that story, but it is important in a different way. In other words, the charity is not necessarily the hero of the story because this is the donor's hero story. I mean, look, every person's own hero story is the most compelling for them. However, the charity is very powerful. It's much like the hammer of Thor. It is the hero's powerful instrument or weapon that allows them to have the greater impact. This might be the lightsaber in the original Star Wars, or it might be the ring in the Hobbit, or every hero story will have its own magical instrument or weapon that helps the hero to complete the journey. And that's the role that the nonprofit can fill. And I'll mention one other character that's absolutely essential to this story, and that is the guiding sage who challenges with a choice. So we can think of this in story as, for example, Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars, making the challenge to Luke to leave behind his small, self-focused world. Or this is Morpheus in the original Matrix, making the challenge to take the red pill or take the blue pill. Or we can think of this as Gandalf the Grey in The Hobbit, making the challenge to Bilbo to leave behind the Shire and go on an adventure. That is the role of the fundraiser, the role to challenge that prospective hero to leave behind his or her small self focused world of personal consumption and instead go on this journey where they make this gift that has an impact on the larger world, using, of course, the powerful instrument of our charitable organization.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. And at least in story, oftentimes the guide actually calls the hero to action because the hero is unsure if they have what it takes. Sometimes they're a little insecure. They're facing this giant challenge. They don't know how they're going to do it. And then the guide comes along, calls them to action, and sometimes gives them a roadmap of how to overcome the challenge. So I love that we get to play that role as fundraisers. And I want to jump in and clarify something here because I know there's people listening who may have a negative reaction to the words "the donor as the hero." And what I just want to clarify here is that we are all our own hero on a mission in our life. And your donors are a hero on a mission. You are a hero on a mission. So are your volunteers. So are the people you're trying to help. By talking about your donors as having a hero story, we are not saying that nobody else in the story gets to be a hero. We're not saying that the other people are de facto victims that don't have a choice in the story or that they matter less in any way. We're definitely not trying to endorse like harm or perpetuating tropes or these stereotypes at the expense of the donor is the hero that saves the day for everybody. I don't think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about in the context of being able to make your donor's life story, the story they are writing with their own life, more complete by giving them an enhanced identity, by giving them a specific and meaningful way to help and to help out. How do you see that? Do I have that
Yeah,
sort of right?
absolutely.
Or
And so, here's the fundamental reality. The most attractive hero story for you is your hero story. The most attractive hero story for me is my hero story. If we're working at a nonprofit, we need to be very much aware of this because fundamentally, the most attractive hero story for charity administrators is the charity administrator hero story, right? This is the wonderful story that says the heroes are the charity administrators who are battling ignorance or disease or inequality. And in that story, the donors play only a bit part. They appear, they honor the administrator's heroism by laying money at their feet, and then they're supposed to disappear. They're supposed to go away. Now that is a compelling story, but only for the charity administrators.
yeah,
I mean, look, if you want to tell the charity administrator hero story, that's great. It might lead to a pat on the head gift or an isn't that nice for you gift,
right.
but it rarely leads to the major life savings investment gift. And so this is the position that the fundraiser is in, recognizing that we've got competing hero stories here. And this is not to say that the administrator hero story is wrong. It's to say that in the context of the donor, it doesn't work very well. In the same way that each person's hero story is the most compelling story for them. So we need to recognize that as fundraisers, we are in many ways translators where we're standing between these two worlds where, the donors are, say, speaking Russian and our administrators are speaking Spanish. And we're the ones in the middle that have to translate these stories in ways that will allow us to fund the causes and make the impact that is meaningful to us.
Right. And do we get to tell stories about beneficiaries? Let's say we're a charity that's helping people. Do we get to tell stories about those people who are at the inciting incident part of their own story? So something has happened to them. They were hurt, they were harmed, they're in this position where the odds are stacked against them, and the charity is trying to help them. And so the charity is telling the donor, your hero story can be to step in here and help this other person um, overcome the challenge they're facing in a way that ties it back to the donor's identity. Is that, should we try to approach it that way?
So there's a difference between small gift stories and major life investment gift stories. So what you're talking about are some sort of one shot strategies that can be effective for the small knee jerk kind of reaction gifts. That's actually a different kind of philanthropy from the major life investment kind of a gift. And so, for that major life investment kind of a gift, we're looking at first what is meaningful for the donor. If money were no object, what kind of an impact would you like to make? What would you like to leave behind for future generations? And then coming up with an opportunity where they can make that kind of impact, often a lasting impact that connects with their values and their beliefs and their identity. So it is something that's more of a challenge when we're looking at these kind of quick hit small dollar stories rather than looking at more personalized philanthropy where
Yeah.
we're there as the guide for the donor, helping them to identify and to construct how they want to bring love or beauty or other important values into the world. So
Yeah,
I don't know if that helps answer the question or
it,
not.
it, it does. I'll give you a bit more context. So
Yes.
we're a direct response agency, and we
Mhm,
see our job as helping charities build a broad base of donors,
mhm,
so they can start to have a pipeline of major donors.
mhm,
So they can start to identify people who can make more transformative gifts, and the people who eventually might be able to make a life savings kind of an investment. And
mhm.
so our big challenge is providing this kind of experience at scale, at mass, and I
Yes.
know that's not entirely possible at all times, but you mentioned three key things that tie back to identity, which is your donors people. So I'm assuming that's friends, family, the people that matter to them.
Yes, so the technical phrase there is an in-group. It is their identifying community, however they define who those people are. Those are my people, however you want to define that.
So Seth Godin's people like us do things like this.
Exactly.
Donors like
So
us
that's the
make
message
make
of
gifts like this.
people like me make gifts like this. Very powerful in fundraising.
Gotcha. The second one is values. So these are the things that obviously they care about. And then three is life story. Have you seen a way to incorporate all three of those into sort of a more mass individual giving sort of a strategy? Or is that just a point where you say, you know what, don't try that because it's not going to work? Try to identify people who can give a little bit more and then get personal and go
So,
from there, right?
right. So there's a couple of different things to keep in mind with that. It is possible to help the donor through that journey at scale. Now, we typically will do that through asking questions at scale. And the way that we ask questions at scale is usually through some form of a donor survey or other kind of high volume question asking, where we are asking questions of donors about how they first got connected to the cause, how this was meaningful to them. Do they have family members who would have appreciated or would appreciate their support of this kind of a cause? And so we can ask questions at scale through a number of those different strategies or techniques that are not just the one-on-one personal conversations. We can have focus groups, we can do donor surveys, we can ask questions in a variety of ways. But one thing to keep in mind is about including all three of these steps: the identity, the challenge, the victory, and then connecting back to identity. Is that oftentimes where fundraising fails is that it will leave some part out. So, for example, the fundraising appeal will leave out the victory. And what I mean by leaving out the victory is that there is no visualizable social emotional outcome that results from my gift.
Right.
In other words, my gift doesn't change anything. Or if it does change something, I never find out about it. There's never any resolution to this story. There's never any confirmation of my victory. And so, what you have is you'll have fundraising organizations that maybe they get the challenge right. Okay, we know how to ask for money, and we've got this great trick or trap that gets people to respond, but then they never deliver the rest of the story. They never deliver the victory. They never make a confirmation that that victory is a reflection of the donor's identity. And instead, what they will do is they will come back and they will want to make another challenge
Right. There's a
before
new
they
challenge.
finish the last story. And so it is having each of these elements in the story that makes it powerful. Now, one thing I will say is through the use of donor surveys or any other ways that we can ask our questions to donors, we've actually are now on the emerging front of technology where we can individually start to package and provide opportunities for the donors that are more meaningful for them, that can be very powerful requests that fit in with the things that are important to those donors. Now, in a traditional sense, we can only do that with the major life investment gifts because it's very time intensive. It
Exactly.
requires that personal, hands on guiding sage process, but we're getting to a world where technology is allowing us, in some cases, to automate the parts of that process that help deliver these things at scale.
Yeah, we've tried doing some of that, and in the survey part of this whole thing, um, it is you end up with a little bit of qualitative, messy data that may reflect some majority sentiment, or it may not. But it is getting there is more and more technology coming out that will make this easier and easier for sure. The interesting part that you mentioned there is the victory. Which is typically in direct response. You present the challenge, um, and then you paint the picture of the desired future state, both for the donor and for the person they're trying to help. And then you back off the victory and you save the victory for the report back and the thank you. And you need to close that loop before you earn the right to ask again. And so one of the things that we started doing is when the organizational constraints allow us to do this, is to actually promise the donor a picture on the day their donation gets to work. This doesn't work for every cause. But for some causes, you can say, on this day, we're going to deliver these packages. And if you make a gift, I'll send you a picture that day so you get to see exactly how your gift is getting to work. And so you're promising the victory, and then you're going to close that loop when it happens. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so Mike, that is so powerful when it comes to storytelling because notice some of the things that you're doing there. You're actually creating a tangible, visualizable outcome. And nothing is more compelling on the social emotional side of the brain than having that tangible, visualizable outcome. If we have that, it is so powerful. And the thing that you're doing that so many nonprofits fail to do is you're not just promising a victory, but you're actually finishing the story where you're delivering the victory. That's the end of the story where we have that resolution that confirms that this hero has completed the journey and is confirming that identity enhancement. And that is so powerful because fundamentally, I've got to tell you that most fundraising, it works a little bit like this. You go to, let's say you go to a theater and You learn about the backstory of this character and their values and what makes them tick, and then something changes where there's an inciting incident and they've got to make a choice, and there's a guiding sage that makes that challenge, and the hero initially resists and says, oh no, I'm not going to do that, but then finally they have that last call to action, and they turn to their guiding sage and say, yes, let's do this. And then the film ends and the credits roll. Now, do you want to go back to another movie by that director? Well, that's typically what nonprofits are asking their donors to do. They are ending the story at the inciting incident, that is, at the ask, and then their very next communication is another inciting incident. Well, wait a second. We didn't finish that last story. Where is my resolution? Where is the confirmation that the victory was accomplished? Because, look, fundamentally, if my gift doesn't change anything, there's no reason for me to make that gift. Story is about character and plot. Plot requires change.
Yeah,
If there is no change, there is no story because there is no plot. And
right.
that is the element that oftentimes we fail to confirm with our donors by ending the story in the beginning rather than finishing it before we start our next story.
Yeah, in Moneyball, the character of Brad Pitt, which is I'm gonna get this wrong. Billy Bean, I think, is his name. He's the coach of the Oakland A's, and they're a team that doesn't have the budget to compete. And he meets this character, Jonah Hill, plays the character, who helps him come up with a brand new way of playing baseball, right? And at the very end, I love this scene. Billy Bean is sort of looking at the empty Oakland A's stadium. He's been wildly successful with this new system, but he's still doubting himself a little bit. He's got this offer for a new job, but he's doubting it. He still doesn't know if he has what it takes. And then the guiding sage comes back and uses a baseball metaphor, but he basically lets him know, like, you've got this, you did it, don't doubt yourself. You took the gamble, it paid off. Don't doubt that, you're it. And it just wraps up the movie nicely, where you go, okay, the sage came back and he affirmed the hero. The hero did the right thing. The plan worked. Um, that is,
And in fact, that same story element, you'll see it. We talk about the hero story. So think of, for any Star Wars fans, the closing scene of the original Star Wars, where it's a scene of public reputation. They are being publicly honored. We see the same thing in most epic hero stories, where there is a confirmation that the hero has accomplished something, that they have changed something, that they have brought a boon or an impact back to their original world that has made a meaningful difference. So, absolutely, that's a core story element. And oftentimes, well, we miss that. And why do we miss that? Very simple answer. It's because internally, the powerful story is not the donor hero story. Internally, the powerful story is the administrator hero story. And in that story, again, the donor's role is to just come and honor the heroism of the administrators, right? That's their job, and then they're supposed to go away so that the heroic administrators can get on with their work. And that is a really compelling story for the charity administrators. But it's not that compelling for the donors to make that kind of a long-term or major life investment type of a gift. So this is a piece that the internal audience isn't going to understand is missing, because they are living a different story. And in fact, if you start talking about the idea of delivering value to donors, of having a donation experience that's worth the gift, that is complete nonsense to those following the charity administrator hero story. Because in that story, no, no, no. The role of the donor is to deliver value to us, not the other way around. So we need to understand that we've got these separate but incompatible hero stories, and
Yeah.
that people are going to behave according to those hero stories, but they neither one of them works well for the alternative audience. And that's where we need to have the wisdom of the guiding sage to stand in between those two hero stories and be able to translate in ways that will work for each world to be able to advance our very important causes.
Yeah. So when a donor makes the gift, that is not the victory yet in their story. And in the charity administrator story, when they get the gift, that is the victory. And that is the confirmation. Somebody will tell the charity administrator, hey, good job. You landed that gift. And so for them, that story is over. And for the donor, that story is somewhere in the middle, right? They haven't seen the victory yet, and they haven't gotten the confirmation yet.
Yeah, in many ways, if you boil down the fundraising message that most charity administrators really gravitate to, let me put it on a personal level. It sounds something like this. It would be if I was trying to raise money by saying, Mike, I just want to tell you, I am fantastic. Can I have some money, please? Oh, that didn't work. Well, Mike, let me tell you, I was founded in 1970. Can I have some money, please? So the idea is something that feels compelling internally, but if you turn around and listen to it from the donor's ears, look, that's good enough again for the small pat on the head gift and for the isn't that nice for you gift, but it's not a transformational message that I'm going to be compelled to make that major investment of my wealth, that is, of my assets, rather than just a little bit of the disposable income gift.
Yeah. So before we wrap this up, let's talk about wealth and assets just a little bit. I recently put up a LinkedIn poll, and I'm really curious how you would answer it. I think I have an idea, but here's the scenario: a donor is willing to give you $100,000, but you get to decide. You can take it as cash, uh, and then you'll have the cash in the bank account today. Two, you can take it as a gift in their will, and you will get it whenever the donor passes away. Or three, you can get it in some form of appreciated stocks, and you're going to have to hire some sort of financial advisor to help you accept it and figure it out. Uh, what would Dr. James do?
So it's not even close. It is so much more massively valuable to get the gift of appreciated assets today. Now, why is that? Well, what we see from the research, and this actually goes back to behavioral economics, a bit of psychology, it has to do with the single most powerful transformation you can make with a committed donor. That single most powerful transformation is to shift their mindset from giving out of their disposable income to instead giving out of their wealth. So, if we are in the disposable income category, then they're going to compare their gifts to other things they spend cash on. What they just spent at Starbucks, and they'll compare the gift to you with what they just spent there. However, if we get them to even consider a gift of stocks, the natural reference point is massively different because now I'm comparing that gift to my wealth. In that case, maybe to my stock portfolio. And that reference point can allow for a massive increase in the potential size of the donation. Here's the other thing that makes that gift so powerful, and that is it actually can change from that point forward the donor's view of their wealth as becoming donation relevant. Here, let me give you just a really simple example on something that most of us can relate to. If you think back to the first time that maybe you had some extra household items, you were redecorating or getting ready to move, and you donated those items to a charity shop. Now, the next time that you have that kind of an experience, what comes to mind when you've got extra household items and things that you don't need? Well, the charitable option comes to mind because you've done it before. Well, in the same way, the first time that we can get a donor to make a gift from their wealth, not from their disposable income, that can be transformational. And honestly, we see this in the national statistical data. I published a study that looked at over 1 million nonprofit tax returns from over 6 years, looking at what factors actually drive long term fundraising growth. And it turns out that one of the most powerful was whether or not the charity was consistently raising gifts, including gifts of securities, rather than only being in that cash only category. Cash only charities over the 5 year period we looked at, they essentially were just treading water, keeping up
Yeah,
with inflation.
exactly.
Those charities that included gifts of securities, their average growth rate was 6 times greater than the cash only organizations over that period of time. Now, of course, the growth rate is even more if you actually go from a cash only organization to an organization that receives gifts of real estate or stocks. But even those that were consistently in that stocks category had a sixfold greater growth rate, at least among those raising at least $1 million or more. So just saying that there is no question on which one I would pick.
Based on your study, and it's got the three bar graphs. It's got the cash only, the cash only, and securities, and then the cash, securities, and gifts of real property. Um, Based on that, we for the last 6 months with two clients in the direct mail, so mass individual giving, not sort of the major donor field. We've been including multiple giving options that include beyond just the typical cash, include donor advised funds, stocks, securities, e-transfers, even pledges. And
Mhm.
we are not A/B testing it because the lists are too small for it to make sort of a meaningful difference to A/B tested. But gifts of assets in 6 months are up already. And of course,
Fantastic.
appreciated stocks allow donors to sometimes get a double tax benefit. This is not any legal or financial advice. This is just a podcast. But and the rules are of course different wherever you're listening right here.
Mhm.
But there are some significant tax advantages for the donors as well that sometimes they are not even quite aware of.
Absolutely. And when we want to communicate those messages, we actually use the same principles. We can share stories of what people like you have done using simple language,
Yeah.
and we can ask questions. So, for example, in a survey, we might ask, what's the likelihood that you might consider a gift of stocks in sometime in the next 6 months? And then they can rate their likelihood. Well, someone who gives us some rating of possibility that lets us know, oh, that's someone who has the capacity to make gifts like that. We want to communicate about other people like the donor who are making gifts like this. Very powerful to share those stories.
Yeah. Well, this has been a pleasure to have you on. Absolute honor. Thank you for coming on. Speaking of a wise sage, that is what you are to many of us as we are advancing our own hero story of being fundraisers, and we look to folks like you who are calling us to action and giving us a roadmap and equipping us to do that. So thank you for the work you do. Before I let you go, we ask every guest on this show is do you have a piece of advice, some encouragement for all the nonprofit leaders, marketers, fundraisers out there who listen to this show, who do the hard work day in, day out of building good in our communities? You can take your time. This gets edited, so you can.
So, Mike, what I would say to the fundraisers is that you are engaged in meaningful work beyond the simple dollars that you're bringing to your very important causes. That this process of working with donors to encourage generosity is a fundamentally meaningful and valuable positive human process. And when we understand our role, as I like to call it, the guiding sage, in helping people bring love and beauty into the world that fits with their values and their life story, that is a really powerful and valuable and meaningful work to be engaged in. So let me just say that encouraging message to the fundraisers who often living between these different worlds are kind of the folks that get left out, that maybe are not as appreciated as much as they should be. So let me offer that encouragement.
Dr. James, if people want to know more, if they want to follow you, if they want to get into some of this research or get at some of these books, where can they go?
I share all my stuff for free. All you've got to do is connect with me on LinkedIn. I will then send you a ridiculously inappropriate reply that gives you links to all of my papers and books and videos and slide sets and everything else related to fundraising and major gifts of assets. Happy to share that with any folks who have interest. So please feel free and do that. If you're not on LinkedIn, you can email me. It's just a little easier for me to keep track if you just connect with me on LinkedIn. So I would appreciate that.
Well, thank you for your generosity of spirit.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.